She thought she could enter with a master key. HOA Karen panicked. When my son stood his ground, she thought no one was home. She thought she could walk right in with her shiny master key and her perfect smile. But the moment she turned that lock, my son was standing there looking her straight in the eyes, and what he said changed everything. Moving to Oakwood Heights felt like stepping into the promise of a calmer life. The kind of neighborhood with trimmed hedges, freshly painted fences, and children riding bicycles down quiet streets. For years, we had dreamed of a place where our son, Daniel, could grow up without fear of chaos, where neighbors looked out for one another, and families thrived in peace. The house we bought wasn't grand. It had chipped shutters and a creaky porch swing, but it was ours. My wife, Laura, decorated Daniel's room with little rockets and stars, whispering, "This is where he'll dream big." I believed her. For once, life felt steady. That's when Christine Roberts appeared. The HOA president, though she called herself the guardian of Oakwood standards, introduced herself with a smile polished sharp enough to cut glass. Her outfit was tailored. Her heels clicked on the pavement like she was walking a runway, and her clipboard gleamed with gold edges. She complimented Laura's flowers before immediately pointing out the unapproved mailbox in our front yard. "It's a minor issue," she assured, but the way her pen glided across that citation pad carried the weight of something much larger. At first, we brushed it off. A $25 fine wasn't the end of the world, but what Laura noticed later unsettled her. The paper stock was too heavy, the ink too crisp, almost as if it belonged in a courtroom rather than a neighborhood association. That night, while Daniel slept, Laura whispered to me at the kitchen table, "This isn't about mailboxes. Something about her feels staged, like she's running a show." I tried to shrug it away, but the unease lingered. Our dream neighborhood suddenly carried shadows we hadn't expected, and Christine's eyes always seemed to watch. 3 days later, Daniel was playing basketball in the driveway when Christine returned. This time, she didn't bother with pleasantries. She strode straight up, clipboard in hand, and said, "Your son's hoop violates community aesthetics." Daniel froze, the ball slipping from his hands. He was just 14, lanky with hair that always seemed a little too messy. Basketball was his escape, his way of finding rhythm when the world felt too heavy. He looked at me, silently asking if he'd done something wrong. I stepped forward. "It's a portable hoop. He rolls it back after he's done." Christine's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Portable or not, it disrupts the visual harmony of the cul-de-sac. The board has decided." "Oh, the board?" I cut in. "We've been here a week." "What board meeting was that?" She tilted her head, unfazed. "The board doesn't need to consult every homeowner before enforcing standards." Then she scribbled another fine, this one for $75, on that same thick, watermarked paper. Daniel's shoulders sank. Later that night, he asked quietly, "Dad, am I a problem for her? For this place?" My chest tightened. No boy should feel like he's breaking laws for bouncing a ball in his own driveway. Laura wrapped her arm around him, whispering, "No, sweetheart. You're the best part of this place." But Christine wasn't done. That weekend, a notice appeared taped to our door. Mandatory compliance inspection. Bold letters. Professional formatting. Almost threatening in tone. It wasn't a request. It was a declaration. Laura stared at it for a long time before whispering, "She's not going to stop, Larry. She's building something bigger, and I don't know what she wants from us." I looked over at Daniel, who was trying to study but kept glancing at the window like someone might be watching, and deep down, I knew Laura was right. The morning of the inspection, Christine arrived unannounced. No knock, no courtesy, just the sound of a key sliding into our front door. Daniel was home alone. We didn't realize she had what she called a master key for emergencies. Except there was no emergency. Just Christine, dressed in her polished blazer, pushing our door open like she owned the place. But Christine didn't expect Daniel standing there in the hallway, his shoulders squared, his voice steady. "You can't come in here." His tone carried more authority than his age should have allowed. Christine blinked, momentarily stunned. Then she smirked. "Sweetheart, this is HOA business. I'm allowed access for compliance checks." Daniel's grip tightened on the doorknob. "This is my home. You don't belong here." He wasn't shouting. He wasn't pleading. Just calm, unwavering defiance that made Christine falter. For the first time, she realized this wasn't just about homeowners. This was about a boy who refused to be made small. When Laura returned minutes later and found Christine lingering in the doorway, her fury nearly shook the walls. "You tried to enter my house without permission?" Christine's face reddened, her smooth composure cracking. She muttered something about authority and protocol, but Laura wasn't hearing it. She stood eye to eye with her, trembling but unyielding. Daniel, still gripping the doorframe, whispered, "Mom." She thought she could walk right in, and Christine, for the first time since we'd met her, took a step back. That night, our dining table became a war room. Laura spread out the citations, notices, and the inspection order. Every sheet of paper gleamed with that same watermark. CR Enterprises, Christine Roberts Enterprises, Laura murmured, tracing the letters with her finger. "She's not just HOA president. She's running a business." Daniel leaned forward, his young face tight with determination. "She acts like she owns everyone here." I nodded, though the weight of what Laura uncovered sank heavily in my chest. Christine wasn't volunteering her time to keep lawns tidy. She was turning fear into revenue, disguising control as community service. Laura snapped photos of each document, cataloging them like evidence. Her background in office administration gave her an eye for details others overlooked. The spacing of the font, the expensive ink that didn't smudge, the sequential numbering that looked more like invoices than neighborhood fines. "This isn't just paper," Laura said quietly. "It's a machine. She's feeding it and we're all trapped inside." For the first time, Daniel spoke up, his voice sharp. "Then let's not play her game. Let's fight it." The boy who once worried about being a problem now stared at those papers with fire in his eyes. And in that moment, I realized Christine had miscalculated. She thought she could intimidate us into silence. Instead, she woke something stronger in my son. The following morning, Christine summoned the neighborhood to an urgent safety meeting. Professional flyers landed on every doorstep, full of charts and statistics about declining property values and looming threats. The kind of presentation meant to scare, not inform. The community center filled quickly. Neighbors shifted nervously, clutching Christine's glossy handouts like they were official government reports. Christine stood at the front, bathed in staged lighting, her voice carrying the polished confidence of someone who had rehearsed every line. "Friends," she began, "our neighborhood faces risks that demand immediate compliance with HOA standards. Only through strict order can we preserve the safety and value of Oakwood Heights." She flipped through slides, graphs, bold headlines, red warning signs. Fear spread across the room like wildfire. But then Daniel stood up. His voice cracked slightly at first, but he didn't back down. "Where did you get this data? Who verified it?" The room went silent. Christine blinked, caught off guard by the boy she'd once tried to silence. "Excuse me?" she said, her voice tightening. "You tell us what we can't do. You fine us for basketball hoops and mailboxes. But where's the proof? Where's the truth?" Gasps rippled across the audience. A teenager, just a kid, had challenged the Queen of Oakwood. Christine's face flushed. For the first time, the room saw her not as untouchable, but as questioned. And in that silence, I felt the tide beginning to turn. The meeting ended with murmurs. Neighbors shuffled out, clutching their glossy handouts, torn between fear and doubt. For the first time, cracks appeared in Christine's polished authority. She lingered near the podium, her jaw tight, eyes narrowing at Daniel like he had just become her greatest threat. When we returned home, the night air was tense, heavy with unspoken warnings. Daniel sat at the kitchen table, fidgeting with his basketball, the orange rubber squeaking against the wood grain. "Dad," he whispered, "I don't think she'll forgive me for what I did today." Laura touched his shoulder gently. "You didn't do anything wrong. You spoke the truth. That takes more courage than most adults here." I wanted to echo her words, but my chest was knotted. I knew Christine wouldn't take this lightly. People like her didn't let go. They tightened their grip. That fear became reality the next morning when we woke to find another notice taped to our door. Only this time the paper was different, thicker, the watermark brighter, the fine larger. 500, non-compliance with community safety standards. Laura's hand shook as she held the letter. $500? For what? I read the vague wording. Disruption of community order through willful defiance. No violation. No specifics. Just intimidation printed on expensive paper. Daniel clenched his fists. "She's punishing us. For me, I met his gaze. Then we fight smarter. That night, we started calling neighbors quietly. One by one, people admitted they too had been fined. A retired teacher for seasonal decorations. A young couple for inconsistent curtain colors. All on the same premium paper. All signed Sierra. It was no longer just about us. Christine was running an empire of fear. And now, thanks to Daniel's defiance, people were ready to question her reign. The next Saturday, our living room became a gathering place. 8 families crowded together, their voices hushed, their eyes darting toward the windows as though Christine might be listening. Mrs. Anderson, frail but fierce, clutched her folder of fines. She's bled me dry this year. 4 citations in 2 months. I can barely afford groceries, and she expects me to pay for paper that looks like it came from the White House. A younger father, Mark, shook his head. I thought I was the only one. She fined me for parking too close to my own driveway. Daniel spread the papers across the coffee table, aligning the watermarks. Look, they're all the same. Same ink, same numbering. She's not acting for the HOA, she's printing her own system. His voice, steady but passionate, commanded the room's attention. For the first time, neighbors weren't just scared, they were angry. Laura leaned forward, her voice soft but cutting. She thrives because she isolates us. She makes each of us feel alone. But look around, none of us are alone anymore. Silence fell. People exchanged glances, some with tears, some with relief. A retired man whispered, "So, what do we do?" Daniel looked at me, then back at the group. We stand together. If she shows up at one house, she faces all of us. It was such a simple truth spoken by a boy barely old enough to drive. Yet in that moment, he carried the weight of a leader. The neighbors nodded slowly, some with trembling hands. Fear was still there, but it was no longer stronger than their need for freedom. Christine had built her empire on silence. Daniel had just broken it, but Christine wasn't about to surrender. That very week, a black sedan rolled into her driveway late at night. From our kitchen window, we watched a man in a dark suit step out, briefcase in hand. He moved with the assurance of someone important, someone powerful. Laura grabbed her phone, zooming in through the blinds. That's not a neighbor. Look at the license plate, government issue. The man stayed for nearly 2 hours. When he left, Christine stood in her doorway, speaking rapidly into her phone, pacing like a woman preparing for war. The next morning, new letters appeared in every mailbox. This time the headline screamed, "Critical Compliance Initiative, Immediate Action Required." The language was sharper, more commanding. She wasn't just fining people now, she was declaring control. Neighbors gathered nervously in the cul-de-sac, clutching the letters. Fear spread again, threatening to undo the fragile unity we had built. Mark muttered, "She has backing. Whoever that man was, she's not alone." Daniel stepped forward, his eyes blazing. "Then neither are we." He walked from neighbor to neighbor, reminding them of the night in our living room, of the power they had together. "She wants us scared," he said. "Don't give her what she wants." Laura squeezed his hand, whispering, "You're stronger than she knows." Christine had escalated, yes, but so had we. The climax came 2 days later. Christine called an emergency community meeting in the park, complete with professional speakers, banners, and even a projector. It looked less like a neighborhood gathering and more like a political rally. She stood tall, her voice booming through the microphone. "This community is at risk. Non-compliance will not be tolerated. New penalties will ensure safety and harmony for all." The crowd was tense. Some nodded out of fear. Others looked ready to crumble. Then Daniel stepped forward, basketball under his arm, his messy hair catching the sunlight. He didn't ask permission to speak. He just did. "You say you want safety," he began, his voice trembling at first, then strengthening. "But you've made this place unsafe. You walk into people's homes. You punish families for things that aren't crimes. You scare people into silence. That's not safety. That's control." Christine's face tightened, but Daniel pressed on. "My family moved here for peace. So did everyone else. And we're done living in fear of you." The crowd stirred. Neighbors who had once bowed their heads now lifted their chins. Mrs. Anderson raised her trembling hand and called out, "He's right." One by one, voices joined in. "Enough. We're done. No more fines." Christine's polished mask cracked. She stammered, searching for words. But the people she once controlled were no longer under her spell. Christine tried to fight back. She shouted about authority. about bylaws, about her right to enforce standards. But every word fell flat against the rising chorus of voices. Daniel didn't back away. He stood there firm, his eyes locked on hers. This isn't your neighborhood. It's ours. It wasn't just defiance. It was truth. And everyone knew it. Neighbors began tearing up their citations on the spot. Glossy papers ripped in half, fluttering to the grass like broken chains. The sound of tearing echoed louder than Christine's microphone. Laura's hand found mine, her eyes wet with tears. "He's leading them, Larry," she whispered. "Our boy is leading them." Christine's face twisted with rage. She screamed, "You'll regret this. Every last one of you." But even as she shouted, the power had slipped from her hands. That night she packed her things. The black sedan returned. This time not for strategy, but for escape. Christine Roberts was gone from Oakwood Heights by dawn, but the story didn't end with her leaving. It ended with Daniel sitting on our porch, basketball in his lap, watching the sunrise. He turned to me and said softly, "Dad, sometimes standing your ground isn't about winning. It's about showing people they're not alone." And in that moment, I knew Oakwood Heights had changed forever. Christine's departure didn't erase the damage overnight. The neighborhood carried scars, financial ones, emotional ones. Some families had emptied savings to pay her fines. Others lived months under her shadow, afraid to decorate their porches or let their kids play outside. Even with her gone, silence lingered, heavy and uncertain. One evening, we hosted another gathering in our living room. This time it wasn't about fear, it was about healing. Neighbors brought casseroles, pies, and stories. They spoke of sleepless nights, of feeling powerless, of holding back tears so their children wouldn't see. Daniel listened quietly at first, his hands folded, his basketball tucked at his side like an anchor. Then, with surprising calm, he said, "She wanted us to feel small. But none of us are small. We just forgot." His words landed gently, like truth often does. Mrs. Anderson dabbed her eyes with a tissue. Mark clapped Daniel on the shoulder. For a moment I saw the boy who once doubted himself becoming someone different. A young man who understood the weight of standing tall. Laura whispered to me later, "He's teaching us more than we ever taught him." That night we agreed to form something new. Not an HOA of fear, but a neighborhood council of trust, shared decisions, open conversations. Real community, the kind Christine had promised but never delivered. Daniel wasn't appointed to anything, but in every way that mattered, he became the voice people turned to. Weeks passed, and the atmosphere began to change. Children played freely in the cul-de-sac again. Porch lights glowed warmly instead of nervously. The basketball hoop that Christine once threatened stood proudly in our driveway, and Daniel shot hoops in the evening without glancing over his shoulder. But reminders of her reign still surfaced. A neighbor discovered boxes of unused citations Christine had abandoned in a storage shed, stacks of glossy papers with the CR Enterprises watermark. Seeing them even untouched sent a chill through me. Daniel picked one up, held it to the light, then slowly tore it in half. "She doesn't own us anymore," he said simply. His calm strength struck me harder than anger ever could. That boy had carried more than any teenager should. Yet instead of bitterness, he carried resolve. Neighbors began telling him stories, how his words gave them courage, how his defiance reminded them of their own strength. He always blushed, shrugged, and said, "I just said what was true." Laura watched him one evening, the golden sunset catching his face, and whispered, "He'll never be the same boy again. He's grown." I nodded, but inside I mourned a little. He had been forced to grow too soon. Still, pride outweighed sorrow. Daniel had faced fear and chosen courage. That choice had changed all of us. Life returned to normal in small, precious ways. Mrs. Anderson's porch was once again filled with seasonal flowers. Mark set up a barbecue in his driveway without fear of citations. Children drew chalk art on sidewalks, laughter echoing down the street. But the real change wasn't just visible, it was felt. People checked on one another. They waved longer. They lingered in conversation. The invisible walls Christine built with fear were gone, replaced with bridges of trust. Daniel became a quiet symbol of that shift. At the grocery store, neighbors thanked him. At the park, parents smiled at him like he was someone who had given back their freedom. He never sought attention, but he accepted it with humility. One evening, sitting on the porch swing, he said, "Dad, I didn't think people would listen. I thought I was just a kid. I looked at him, really looked, and saw more than my son. I saw the strength of a voice that refused to bend, the kind of courage that reminded others of their own. "Sometimes, son," I said softly, "a kid sees what adults forget." He smiled, looking out at the street bathed in twilight. "Then I hope they don't forget again." Months later, a letter arrived in the mail. Not from Christine, she had disappeared without a trace, but from the county. An investigation had been launched into unauthorized citation practices in Oakwood Heights. Apparently, other neighborhoods had reported similar issues. Christine hadn't just targeted us, she had built a network of fear. Reading the letter, Laura exhaled deeply, as if letting go of months of tension. "Justice," she whispered. Daniel skimmed the words, then set the paper down. "Good, but we already beat her." He wasn't wrong. The victory wasn't in legal investigations or fines reversed. It was in the way neighbors had stood together, refusing to bow anymore. The way fear had been replaced with courage. That evening, we gathered at the park for a small celebration. Families brought food, children played, music drifted softly. It wasn't grand, but it was real. Daniel sat cross-legged on the grass, surrounded by kids who looked up to him like a hero. He didn't give speeches or claim credit. He just listened, laughed, and reminded them to stand tall. Watching him, I realized Christine had tried to break us. Instead, she had built something stronger than she ever imagined. The sun dipped low one evening, painting the sky with streaks of orange and purple. Daniel stood in the driveway, bouncing his basketball, the rhythmic thud echoing down the street. Neighbors strolled by, waving, smiling. For the first time since moving to Oakwood Heights, it felt like home. I walked out and leaned against the porch post, watching him. His movements were steady, confident, different from the uncertain boy who once asked if he was a problem here. He caught the ball, held it under his arm, and looked at me. "Dad, do you think people will remember what happened?" I thought for a long moment before answering. Maybe not every detail, but they'll remember how they felt when they stopped being afraid, and they'll remember the boy who reminded them they weren't alone. Daniel smiled, quiet and humble, then went back to shooting hoops, the ball swishing clean through the net. In the fading light, I realized the truth. Christine thought she could control us with paper. With fear, with a key she never had the right to hold. But my son, my 14-year-old son, stood his ground. And in doing so, he unlocked something Christine could never control. Hope. Fear only has power when we face it alone. But the moment someone stands tall, it crumbles. If Daniel's story touched you, remember, you're never powerless. You're never alone. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and press the bell icon for more stories that inspire.